Kim Flintoff.
Is that better? Yep. Just give me a second, I'll try and find where my presentation went.
Sorry.
That's all right. Disruption is all part of the game. Okay. So, there we go. So that's me. Yeah, thanks Chrissy, and thanks everyone else for coming along today. My name is Kim Flintoff. I was a former drama teacher. Prior to that, I worked in theatre and drama. I was a clown for 6 years. Some of you may remember Cats on Rubbish, and I used to coordinate that many years ago. I used to work with Joan Pope and others with Cats. I was on the board there. On the board, something like that. I can't remember what it was nowadays. But right back, I actually left school and studied chemistry and physics. Was the first thing I started studying. And 8 years later, I graduated with a degree in theatre and drama. So go figure. And oddly enough, now I'm actually working back in the university area with technology and with science and with data. And so all of that early learning in science and what's now dubbed as STEM has really sort of found its place. And I think that, combined with my drama background, just positions me in a place nowadays where I'm very comfortable with ambiguity, I'm very comfortable with uncertainty, I'm very comfortable with risk. And I think they're things that we're going to need moving forward. My current role is actually called, the title is Learning Futures Advisor. And a big part of the role is horizon scanning. So what I'm expected to do is to look around, see what's happening in the world, see what's happening in developments in ed tech, see what's happening in educational practice and educational theory and educational research, and also larger societal trends, and to try and guess, because there's always guessing, try and guess what we might need to be doing differently and more effectively by the time Curtin University realises its Greater Curtin vision, which is 2030. So my KPIs started in 2015 and will be realised sometime after 2030, if I'm still working. So it gives you a bit of scope of what I'm doing. I also coordinate the Learning Futures Network, so we're trying to draw together schools and non-school organisations from K-12 right through to higher ed, TAFE, and all sorts of sectors. So we've got groups on board like Questacon, we've got Australian Data Science Education Institute, we've got individual teachers, individual practitioners who, Rachel Bott, who runs Creative Move, she teaches STEM through dance, and she's just a sole trader. And not just a sole trader, she's an excellent teacher as well. But a whole lot of people who are very geared towards thinking about what the future of education is going to require and how that's going to link with the future of work. So that's sort of the realm that I'm working in. I see Paul up there as well. He's another one who's very invested in this space as well. So one of the big challenges I have when talking with academics and school teachers, and as I said, I was a school teacher, I was a drama teacher for quite a few years, this part starts to get tetchy. We need to be able to talk about the systems that we're a part of, the ideas that are circulating around, the practices that we engage with, and the beliefs that we have in very critical ways without taking it personally. And partly, and I know from a teacher's point of view, we invest so much in what we do. We invest a lot of our identity in the work that we do. And sometimes when you start talking about the practices, start talking about the ideas and beliefs that you have, it really feels like someone's sort of trying to cut your heart out. And I think we have to learn a way to be more resilient and more less defensive and more critical and more embracing of some of these sort of ways of thinking. So today, hopefully without the heart surgery, I'd like to try and sort of navigate that sort of space. So I invite you to critique what I'm saying, challenge me, bar me up in a corner and say, no, you're completely wrong, but don't take it personally. Okay. About this time last year, George Monbiot published an article in The Guardian called Factory Outlet, and he was talking about education systems. And those of you who have a history of the Western education systems will know about Taylorism. So Taylor looked at saying, okay, well, this new education model is great because we could just churn out a whole bunch of people who can sit quietly at the factory station and do the little job. They're not going to argue, but they can read the instructions and they can go home at the end of the day, and then they can spend their money on the goods that they're producing, and that keeps our economy moving along. Now, we've moved, hopefully, a long way as a society, and recognising that there's a lot more to just being a factory worker. Not that there's anything wrong with factory workers. But we can't all be factory workers, and there's a whole lot of other scope that needs to come on. So George Monbiot started to ask some questions about the way our education systems are functioning. And he was sort of saying that we need critical capacity, we need creative capacity, we need socially skilled. So these are all the really important 21st century skills that everyone's talking about. And they're presented in all sorts of different ways. In the Australian curriculum, they're presented as the general capabilities. And my argument is that the general capabilities should be the core of what we're actually focusing on and working with kids in schools. We should be focusing increasingly on developing the learner and wrapping our curriculum around that, not putting the curriculum, leading the whole equation. So I'll just read through these questions and just let them sit with you as we talk through this morning. So if you want a job in the future, you must be as unlike a machine as possible, creative, critical and socially skilled. So why are children being taught to behave like machines? Here's words on one. Children learn best when teaching aligns with their natural exuberance, energy and curiosity. And this goes to what Sam was saying at the beginning there. So why are they dragooned into rows and made to sit still while they're stuffed with facts? We succeed in adulthood through collaboration. So why is collaboration in many situations of tests and exams called cheating? And so that's a cultural thing as well. There's an article in the paper just the other day that in certain parts of the world, that cultural sense about appropriation of other people's knowledge is not seen as cheating. It's actually just seen as being very efficient. So the Western mindset around ownership of knowledge and all that sort of stuff really can impact on our education. Sometimes we get far too hung up on that at the expense of kids' learning. Governments claim to want to reduce the number of children excluded from school. So why are their curricula and tests so narrow that they alienate any child whose mind does not work in a particular way? Now, if you think about this, is that our classic way of dealing with kids who don't want to play the education game and don't want to do the ATAR pathway to university is to say, okay, well, that's fine, you can do all that, but we're going to punish you. Is if you don't play that game, you have to then go and do this really boring entry-level enabling course and bridging program to get into university. You have to wait a couple of years before you can get into it. We're going to stop the flow of your education because you won't play the game that we want you to play. Increasingly, we're finding ways to navigate around that. So we're seeing the numbers of entries to university based on ATAR dropping down to phenomenally low levels. So, and they're really only being used, from what I can see, to distinguish who gets into those really high-end courses that are incredibly competitive. And even then, they're not a great predictor of who comes out the other end of those programs. Which is partly why I don't get too worried about people with a very low ATAR score being admitted to teaching programs, because it's not what they come in as, it's what they leave as. So Curtin University has introduced Uni Ready in Schools, which is a program that sits as a standard WACE entry program, and it gives you a nominal 70 entry to Curtin, and a couple other universities are saying that they're going to recognise it soon too, without having to go through all the stress and trauma of an ATAR process. You can also do the ATAR process alongside it if you want to hedge your bets. So there's those sort of things. So these changes are happening, and that's happening in a range of places around the world. We're already seeing in Victoria that schools are negotiating their own pathways directly to the university without having to go through all the standard sort of high school certificate programs and all those sorts of things. So Templestowe, I think, was one of the first to look at that, and Peter Hutton's moved on to taking on the whole system at a much higher level now. So we're really sort of thinking about what is it with our system that has strength and value. And part of it is the relationship with kids and teachers. That's probably at the core of it, is when we start talking about all these things, we come back to the people are the key factor in the equation. And this leads to George's next point, is the best teachers use their character, creativity and inspiration to trigger children's instinct to learn. So why are character, creativity and inspiration suppressed in a stifling regime of micromanagement? Anyone familiar with that process? I won't ask you to speak out if you've got management here, but we do get increasingly caught up in administrivia as part of our teaching role. I don't know a teacher that doesn't complain about the amount of time that they spend simply going through the administrative aspects of keeping track of what's going on in their classroom, reporting that through the systems, and largely reducing it down to a relatively meaningless number at some point. And I think that's where there's a lot of criticism, a lot of critique going on in the system. And I'm not the only one saying this. Digital Promise, which is headed up by Karen Cater in the US, has actually started creating a map of all the challenges facing the future of education. I won't go through them all, it'll take all morning to get there. But just to show that there is a lot of thought going into this space globally. There's a common suggestion that it takes a village to raise a child, and I suggest that a school's not actually a village anymore. A school is more like a small corporation. When I was thinking at one stage about applying for a principalship, I was advised that my next best step would be go get an MBA. I start to wonder about when school management and other things come down to all the business principles, and that education starts to take a back seat to that. And I know that's never the intention. I know that's never the intention, but the way systems work at times is we get into habitual pragmatism. We start to get so bound by the way that we are used to functioning within a very limiting environment, and we stop the blue sky thinking. We stop thinking beyond the realms of of possibility. We think is what will my system allow me to do, rather than what can I do, or how can I work around those systems. I'm really lucky I have a boss at Curtin who says that it's easier to apologise than to ask permission. So that drives a lot of the work that I do. I've already flagged this comment here about conversation about technology and education always comes back to discussing people and culture. Now, a friend of mine at University of Connecticut has a couple of years ago had a first child, and started observing his child working with technology in the house, and his 2-year-old was running up to the big screen TV and saw an icon that he recognised on the screen and started banging it, and increasingly getting frustrated because this new big 3D television didn't do what it was supposed to do. It's a screen, it's supposed to respond when you touch it, and it didn't. And so my friend Matt started wondering, well, if his expectations at 2 are that high of the technology, what's it going to be in 2032 when he graduates from high school? And the Class of 23 project was born.
Children like Ray are growing up in the midst of a technological revolution that is disrupting the world that came before. Information around them is now prolific, and the manner in which it can be accessed is vast. This film is a discussion about the emergence of our digital culture and what we must now consider as we prepare our system of schooling for the class of 2032 and beyond.
Our generation has access to information in a way that was never possible before. It's in our pocket. Literally anything we want to know is in our pocket.
When we were growing up, you didn't have that kind of information at your fingertips that was readily available. So if you wanted to know something, you had to think about what you wanted to know. Then you had to go find a place where you could visit to look that up.
The ability for anyone to post whatever they want to post, and for any other person, any other server to be able to access that freely and openly, has transformed the way that information is exchanged. And ultimately, the exchange of information and the achievement of knowledge and understanding are the aims of education.
So the change is there. Things are so different. How have we addressed how those things change? I would argue we just haven't done it very well yet.
A little thought provoker there. We actually have the full film available if anyone wants to host a screening with your school community. We'll happily help you out, seeing that there's no cost involved, and it feeds back into Matt's research, because this is a longitudinal study that's got quite a few years ahead of it with 2032. There we go. So I suppose that sort of raises one of the questions about the digital culture, is that there's this whole sense that when you're on the screen, you're somehow not involved with the real world. It's all real world now. For us, it's new because it's penetrated our world. We are the digital migrants. We've had to migrate into this world where technology came to us. But kids, and to get away from the traditional discussion that came out in education about the digital native a few years ago, just the really simple basis is that kids have not had to adapt to technology. Kids have grown up with it there, just the same as we grew up with backyards and swings and trees to climb. The kids nowadays are growing up with technology that's ubiquitous. Every device that they touch over the next few years will be connected. It'll be a data source. It'll be part of the Internet of Things. And we need to give them the critical capacity to stop and think about that, for one thing. We need to give them the capability to take control of that technology rather than just letting it wash over them and just the whole sort of tide of technological industry shaping where the kids are going to go. We need that two-way discussion. So one of the projects I'm involved with at the moment is the Co-Action Learning Lab out of Penn State. And we've got a group of 19 institutions around the world, and what we're trying to do is navigate and find some standards about negotiating that relationship between EdTech and education, particularly at the higher education level at this stage. But that will start feeding in. And another project is the Consortium of Schools Networking. We're looking at what drives innovation in K-12, and that's a global project. And it's the same sort of thing. We're looking at what are the hurdles, what are the drivers, and technology is one of the massive drivers and accelerators of the change and innovation that's required in schools. One of the speakers in the video elsewhere made this comment, is when you no longer have control over the information that students receive, your role in that classroom changes. We used to be the font of knowledge. We used to be the point of contact where, you know, here's the keys to the cupboard so you can go get your Funkin' Wagnalls. And, oh good, people remember that. But now we're not needed for that anymore. We don't need to be the person who delivers information anymore. We all know that. We've been telling this. I mean, John Dewey told us that back in 1911. So why are we still having the discussion? And it's partly because systems often change very slowly, and systems are driven by all sorts of other things beyond the classroom. Somebody's already spoken about this morning. 65% of kids entering primary school will find themselves in occupations that don't exist today. So I remember seeing an old, it was always posed as a Chinese proverb, but I doubt that it was don't condemn children to your own learning. And I think that's part of what we've traditionally done, is we know the way the world works, and so we try and teach that. What we actually have to do now is foster a capability in kids to challenge the world that they're a part of, to be a part of it. I mean, I'm involved with the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations program, and a lot of things. And one of the big things that we've had a hard time getting is children's voices coming through that, and it's coming through with a vengeance at the moment. And kids are just going to sweep us out of the way because they know that their future and their future survival means that we either have to play with them or get out of their way, because they're going to save the planet one way or another, with or without us. So the occupations that they're facing are going to be tied to a lot of those sort of sustainability focused things. They're going to be massive shifts in the way that energy works. I mean, Western Power's most recent little experiment down at Meadow Springs with putting in a community power bank, something that none of us thought about when we were all putting solar panels on our roof, but something now we can feed our excess power into a local community power bank, still use the existing grid so we don't have to knock down all that sort of things, but with a very small charge we can draw back that cost and also share it with those people who don't have solar power as well. So, you know, people who are renting, whose landlords haven't invested in putting a bit of solar on the roof, can still tap into relatively cheaply produced energy at low cost and with the convenience of a local production as well. So there's a whole lot of things. And those systems are going to require maintenance, they're going to require monitoring, programming, and all sorts of other capabilities that are only at the highest level of existing engineers and practitioners in the field. So our kids are going to come on and start filling their gap. And whatever comes beyond that, we don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, there's the whole space agency starting here in Australia. What's going to happen there? I mean, remote sensing, remote monitoring is a huge part of what's happening here in Western Australia. The industry that's going to open up around that will be huge. Sadly, technology amplifies bias, and we've seen that in all sorts of ways with notions of fake news and everything else. But it also, because of the ubiquity of technology, kids are exposed to a whole range of ideas repetitively. And so their expectations start to shift in many ways. And one of the big risks was highlighted in a project that came through the UK. And with a bit of luck, this will work. There you go.
This afternoon, we're going to draw people doing different jobs. And the first job we're going to draw is a firefighter.
Have a think in your head what a firefighter looks like.
What's your fire firefighter called?
Mine's called Firefighter Gary. Firefighter Stan. Firefighter Simon. He's big and strong. He's got a big helmet on.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Next, we're going to draw a surgeon. Have you thought of a name for your surgeon?
Jimbo.
Jimbo.
He's a brain surgeon. I think he would wear a stethoscope. He gives you medicine.
That's his ambulance.
Okay, next, we're going to draw a fighter pilot.
This is his jet plane. He rescues people. He likes to do stunts in the air and stuff.
Okay, now who would like to meet these people for real? My name's Tamsin and I'm a surgeon in the NHS.
My name's Lauren and I'm a pilot in the Royal Air Force.
My name's Lucy. I'm a firefighter in the London Fire Brigade.
So who wants to know how to do an operation?
Who's better not?
Try my stethoscope.
We'll put this in here. There you go. Now you're a proper fighter pilot.
So into your ears. Can you hear that? It's really good. But yeah, it's much better than my kids' one.
Okay, so that has a very clear focus on the gender imbalance in STEM industries and those sorts of things. And that's a big part of what the education system's driving. Coder Dojo's working on that, Girls Can Code movement. There's so many different focus on that, but there's a whole lot of other aspects of stereotypes and ways of thinking and the biases that we hold. And that's actually about our practices in consumption. It's about the way we think about each other. It's about the way that we prioritise one culture over another. All of those things are amplified as bias within the technological system. So part of what we have to really foster is this really critical approach to the way that technology presents not just standard information in the news, that sort of thing, but the way that they're implicit in the actual technology itself. We've seen all the experiments with AI that have gone wrong, where suddenly Google or Microsoft have released an AI bot, it's found its way to Twitter, and suddenly it's learned how to be a white supremacist overnight. So we're doing that more slowly with kids, and I think that's partly what we need to look at as well, is how do we become really critical partners in kids navigating the technological space of the future. And my proposition is that we don't need more schooling. I keep reading the papers going, oh yeah, we need a new 3-year-old kindy level and all this sort of thing. It's like, great, more schooling. Why not a different kind of schooling? Why not something that makes learning different? Why not something that gets kids to year 11 and 12 without 30+% of them experiencing clinical levels of anxiety and depression? Any other system that caused that would be shut down. If you were a business that caused that much grief to your customers, you wouldn't exist. And yet we laud our education system as, isn't it wonderful? I think we've got some problems. And we need to start thinking about that. And we're all part of that system. And every time we turn a blind eye to it, we tacitly endorse it. We all learned about hidden curriculum when we went through our teacher training. We all learned about hegemony, the prevailing overarching views that never get talked about. We all know when we go into a school what the school front is, what the media sees, what the signs on the gate say, but it can be a very different experience inside that gate. And I think we're all responsible for saying those things have to start matching up in reality, not just in words and in media presentation. A couple of our friends and some of our bosses have been in the press lately talking about some of these sort of things. So Andy Fogarty wrote a nice editorial on the role of collaboration. That ties really nicely with the work that we're doing with Learning Futures and creating networks of opportunity. And then Esther Hill from All Saints and also from Schools of Thinking has been talking more about too, how do we have to change the nature of the experience so that by the time kids get to year 11 and 12, they're not feeling suicidal, they're not feeling anxious and depressed, they're not so worried that the next decision they make is going to be the most crucial one in their lives. And they can actually enjoy their learning. Why shouldn't we graduate from school with a love of learning and enjoyment of what we've been doing, looking back and saying, that's some of the best time of my life rather than some of the most grueling. And I look at the work that Seymour Papert talks about. He talks about hard fun, learning through hard fun. And there's a quote somewhere in one of my slides where it says, there's never been a video game that's gone out there and says, oh, come and play this game, it's the easiest game you'll ever play. Because people want challenge. People want to overcome the obstacles and overcome the challenge. But they don't want to have to do it in the face of personal adversity. They want to actually do it through a problem-solving process in collaborative systems and working in real and meaningful ways. And as these kids are looking to their future, they're seeing all the news about melting polar ice caps, they're seeing the issues about climate change, global poverty, world hunger, all of these things, and they want to find solutions for that. And some of us are starting to give. I was at a session yesterday where Greenbatch was showcasing some of their new work around recycling plastics. One small step towards making some of these sort of changes. Increasingly, we're running hackathons and all sorts of other events where kids are solving these global problems. We need to listen to those kids' voices about what their future should be like. Jane Caro talked about the education system being more play-based, and if a lot of you are early childhood educators, you will know where that comes from. You will know that basis of play, and you'll know that as soon as you come and observe a kid's play, it changes. And when we're constantly observing and constantly assessing what kids are doing, they're not playing anymore. They're engaged in some sort of bizarre assessment activity. I've already commented on this one. Front-loaded curriculum is seen its day. It needs to change. And none of us yet have really got a clear answer on how that's going to happen. There's my video game quote. So this is one possible way, is allowing kids to invent, to create, to solve real problems. I've never seen, and I have done this several times over the last few years. I've walked into a group of kids from year 4 through year 12 and said, guys, we're here to solve world hunger. How are we going to do it? And they immediately start coming up with ideas. We don't ask enough of those sort of questions when we're teaching. Systems like Scratch, which is the basis of a lot of the coding courses that are around town in Coda Dojo that Karen will talk about shortly, puts back the power of creation into the hands of kids and makes it accessible, and it gives them control of the outcome. One of the basic rules of Coda Dojo is that if you make it, you can play it. You can't just come in and play a game that you find on the net. But if you build a game yourself, you can play it to your heart's content. So the kinds of problems that we offer kids in school just aren't big enough. We come in with problems that we already know the answer to because we feel safe doing that. The kids don't need that. The kids don't need to be worried about our feeling of safety and resilience. The kids actually need to be thinking about how can they make a difference in the world that they're growing into. So this is just some feedback on one of the reports, one of the projects run by a teacher. I can't remember what it was now. I did have a reference on this, but I've lost it. But it was about planting seeds. And so there was a group of year 2 kids, I remember now. And the teacher said, we're going to solve world hunger. And the kids come up with the idea of, well, let's start teaching people how to grow their own food. And it's a nice, sensible way of doing it. And there's a whole lot of things implicated with that we as adults can start to say, oh, the burden of distribution and everything else. Well, how do we begin? Let's teach people how to plant seeds. And so we're immediately into the biological aspects of STEM. But the reason we're engaging with it is because we're trying to save everyone else in the world who doesn't get a decent meal. Not just to pass the test at the end of the week. Challenge-based learning is a way to think about really big global challenges. Scaffold the process, don't deliver the content. Kids will find the content that they need to answer and solve the problems that they're working on. I think the headline sums it up, is STEM done properly is an integrated approach. It doesn't exclude, it's not an argument for which of the letters of STEM you're representing. It's actually about how do you bring meaning through STEM, through engagement, to all those important things that we do in life. STEM is a way of us exploring and expressing our ethics, our values, our systems of belief. It's not, if you build 4 pillars, you've got an archaeological site, is one of the things that I often say. And very often when I see people talking about STEM, that's all they're talking about is 4 different pillars, and none of them are connected, and they're just sitting there out in the open, and I'm reminded of my trip to Turkey. It's not helpful. These things have to sit there with connection to what's important in our lives. So our role as teacher has to be about providing the conditions for these inventions to occur, provide the opportunities for innovation. Standardisation is great for academic researchers, it's great for political systems, it's great for people writing short reports that can hit the press. It doesn't help practitioners and kids very much. Standardisation is another legacy of the old industrial approach to things where everything's the same. You all sit on the same conveyor belt, so you all have to know the same basic functions of how to move. We've moved beyond that. We have to find a new way of redefining it and thinking. I mean, I'm still flabbergasted at the PISA notion of they're going to do a standardised test for creativity. And even more is the irony of, at the moment, all those kids in Year 2, Year 4 and Year 6 who are being tested with diagnostic tests to see how they're going to do next year when they sit the diagnostic test. But of course, it makes the numbers look really good when you report back to the department and the school rankings. And that's important, isn't it? Sorry, that's my cynical bit. And this whole thing of we pump kids through at the same age level. So I love the way Ken Robinson says it, the date of manufacture. It might as well be a use-by date. We have to think of ways of reorganising our schools, shifting timetables, shifting the ways that we put kids together. Why isn't it sensible to have a Year 6 kid working with a Year 3 kid, because they can learn from each other? The Year 6 kid can be a mentor, can be a guide, can develop all their capabilities as a leader, as a teacher, and yet we segregate them. They're not even allowed to play in the same play area in some schools. This is probably my favourite. It comes from Seymour Papert, and I was very lucky to work with one of his students earlier this year. She was over from the University of Maine, and we went on an 8-week tour of the STEM and maker spaces around the metropolitan schools. But kids know how to learn. We don't really need to teach them how to learn. What we end up doing is we go back to the habitual pragmatism that I talk about. We start to teach them how to learn in the system that we've created. And when that system is gone, a lot of people don't know how to learn anymore. And I see it a lot with teachers, and I was a pre-service teacher educator for several years. I know a lot of teachers who believe that unless there is somebody there teaching them, they can't advance, they can't move forward. And that's been sort of exacerbated by the 100 hours of professional learning that you've got to do. A lot of people are just going and looking for someone to tell them something new that they can tick off their hour. Instead of actually being creators and inventors in their own right, collaborators. And we see groups like TeachMe starting to evolve, where people are sharing ideas and meeting together and those sort of things, and they're great. The trouble is with really large groups like that, they start to become yet another system, and they start to focus more on harmony of the group rather than the critical intent that they began with. And that's one of the things that we have to do with every system we engage with. We have to remain critical. Because systems try to generate one way of doing things, back to standardisation, remember? And if you only know one thing, one way, you don't really know anything at all. And that's, I think, the lesson for us. Who's driving the learning in the classroom? Because whoever's doing that controls where you're going. If the kids are driving the learning, you're going to end up somewhere very different. So, that's my closing slide. Thank you.